Imagine waking up one day and getting ready for work, just like any other morning, on a day that should be just like any other day. What happens if by the end of the day, your life changes forever in an unimaginable way? Imagine an accident, something preventable, leaving you to be trapped inside of your own body in excruciating pain for 83 days. This isn't just an imagination exercise. It's not a what if, it's not a fairy tale. This is the reality of Hisashi Ouchi, a man who, on a day that should have been like any other workday, became a living symbol of the horrors of nuclear accidents. Picture this. It's Japan in 1999. Tokaimura facility, Japan's first nuclear power plant, has been standing as a bright beacon of technological advancement since 1966. And in that time, it has powered homes and businesses in Ibaraki Prefecture. It has cranked out over 1,000 megawatts of electricity. That's impressive, right? But beneath this shiny facade of progress, there was a ticking time bomb just waiting to go off. Enter Hisashi Ouchi, a 35-year-old technician at Tokaimura, just an ordinary guy doing his job. Going to work every day, he's got a routine, and everything seemed to be going well until September 30th, 1999, when his life would take a catastrophic turn. On that fateful day, Hisashi was helping a coworker, Masato Shinohara, with what should have been a routine task. They were pouring uranium oxide into a precipitation tank. But here's the kicker. In the process of rushing to meet a tight deadline and under the pressure of their company, the two workers were pushing the limits. And in their haste, they skipped some crucial safety steps. As the uranium hit the tank, they saw a blinding flash of blue. This flash of light screamed danger. It meant that the uranium had reached critical mass, and a self-sustaining nuclear reaction began, dousing Hisashi in lethal radiation. This moment marked Hisashi's first steps into a living nightmare. Exposed to more radiation than any human in recorded history, Hisashi was hit with severe nausea and quickly lost consciousness. He was rushed to the hospital where a radiation expert, Dr. Kazuhiko Maekawa, took over his care. Hisashi's symptoms seemed mild. He just had kind of a redness of his skin, some really minor swelling, and there was hope that maybe it wasn't as bad as it seemed, and maybe he would recover. This was, unfortunately, just the calm before the storm. His condition deteriorated so rapidly, and let me just tell you, his journey through unimaginable pain had only just begun. So how did it all go so horribly wrong? To get to the bottom of that, we've got to talk about the Tokaimura facility and what led to this accident. Because it wasn't just random, it was a disaster waiting to happen. We're talking about a perfect storm of regulatory neglect, rushed procedures, and inadequate training, to be honest. The facility had been cutting corners. Left and right, they were cutting corners to save time and money. Safety measures were practically non-existent, and the pressure to meet production deadlines through the roof. Japan Nuclear Fuel Conversion Company, or JCO, was the company running this whole show. They were behind on producing nuclear fuel rods, and so to catch up, they were pushing their workers to mix uranium using some pretty sketchy methods. Beside Hisashi on this day was Masato Shinohara, his co-worker, and the one pouring the uranium on that fateful day. Both men were under this immense pressure from the company and from their supervisor, Yutaka Yokokawa, who was overseeing the whole process. Yokokawa, sitting comfortably in his chair at his desk, kept pushing telling the men to hurry. The plant was behind schedule, and there was no time for proper safety protocols. They had done this so many times before. They knew how to do it. What could go wrong? But this rush, this oversight on his end, on the company's side, it proved to be deadly. Now, most of us have probably been in a situation in the past where an employer pushes for more work, faster work to cut costs, running a production on a skeleton crew, and just expecting the smaller group of people to do the work of many. Cutting corners isn't exactly a new concept, and I'm sure it sounds familiar to a lot of you. But pushing for faster production and cutting corners on safety measures in a place where accidents can be fatal, that's a whole nother ballgame. Anyway, instead of using the standard mixing techniques, the standard mixing tank, Hisashi and Masato were forced to pour uranium oxide into a precipitation tank using a stainless steel bucket. This dangerous shortcut set off a chain reaction. Now, if you're not aware, uranium oxide is a radioactive compound used in nuclear fuel processing. It contains enriched uranium, meaning it has a higher concentrate of the isotope that undergoes fission to release energy. When handled improperly, like it was at Tokaimura, the uranium can reach critical mass, which initiates a runaway nuclear chain reaction and releases a massive amount of radiation, capable of causing severe biological damage. The workers at Tokaimura witnessed a flash of blue light, like I told you. That's called a Cherenkov light. This happens when charged particles, like electrons, travel through a medium like water, for example, faster than the speed of light in that medium. So kind of like a sonic boom, but with light, so a visual effect. And that blue glow, that flash of light, it's like a telltale neon, big flashing danger sign. That's all a very sciencey way of saying that the big flashing danger sign was telling Hisashi and Shinohara that a chain reaction had occurred. And in that moment, that nuclear reaction doused Hisashi with lethal radiation. If proper safety procedures had been followed, the uranium would have been mixed safely, and this reaction would have never happened. But no, thanks to the oversight of JCO and the supervisor and the pressure, the workers were basically left to fend for themselves. These actions, driven by pressure and a lack of proper training, led to one of the worst nuclear accidents in history. Hisashi, Masato, and Yokokawa, they're just tiny cogs in a much larger, very flawed machine. Hisashi Ouchi's suffering and the suffering of his family wasn't just from the radiation, it was the result of systemic failures and a relentless drive for efficiency at any cost. It's a grim reminder of what can happen when safety is sacrificed on the altar of productivity. And then after all of this, we have medical professionals like the expert in radiation, Dr. Kazuhiko Maekawa, treating someone exposed to such high levels of radiation, remember, higher than any human had ever experienced before. So this was an unprecedented challenge for the doctor and for the hospital staff. It was a grueling task, and in the end, it led to some controversial decisions and some ethical dilemmas. While this accident had far-reaching consequences and impacted families, communities, and the entire nuclear industry worldwide, it's hard to downplay the ordeal that Hisashi dealt with on a personal level. What he endured because of his exposure and because of the controversial medical treatments he received after the fact, it can't be forgotten. As I mentioned before, Hisashi Ouchi was a 35-year-old technician at Tokaimura. He was also a devoted family man. He had a son in the 3rd grade. He was known for his punctuality and his dedication to his work, to his family, to his friends. Ouchi was the kind of guy who played rugby in high school and who enjoyed a couple of glasses of shochu every night. He had a very strict routine for himself. He was up by 6 in the morning, out the door by 6:40, and he was always in bed by 9 p.m. every night. After being exposed to the highest dose of radiation ever recorded, Hisashi's battle for survival began the moment he was rushed to the hospital. Despite the initially mild appearance of his symptoms, just the reddening of his skin and the swelling, the true extent of the radiation damage became horrifyingly clear soon after he arrived. His chromosomes were so severely damaged that doctors couldn't even make out their shapes on a scan, and any new cells that his body created became malformed and damaged at the time of creation, or at least soon after. After a short while, Hisashi's skin began to peel away at even the slightest touch. Removing medical tape or washing his feet would shed layers of skin, and every time it happened, it would expose raw, agonizing wounds. Hisashi would say that breathing was torture because it felt like he was burning from the inside out every time he took a breath. And that's not all. Hisashi's gastrointestinal tract was a disaster. His body could no longer absorb nutrients, so everything he ingested just passed right through him. At one point, he was losing up to 3 liters a day of liquid, just purging his own organs. And it got so bad that doctors observed blood along with that liquid, which indicated severe internal damage. The doctors at this point were desperate to save him, and so they attempted a groundbreaking stem cell transplant using his sister's blood. They hoped that new, healthy cells could replace the damaged ones. Initially, it seemed like it could have been working. There were signs of improvement. His body did start producing more white blood cells, and there was some hope that maybe he could pull through and he could recover from this. After a while, it became clear that even these new, healthy blood cells were showing signs of radiation damage, as if they had come in to be the cleanup crew and they were doused in whatever radiation was left before they could even start. Throughout his 83 days of agony, Hisashi underwent about 70 skin grafts to replace the skin that continuously peeled off. His body was completely wrapped in gauze, with the exception of his eyes and the tips of his feet, which remained exposed. And the gauze had to be changed daily. But remember that his skin was peeling off in sheets, in layers. So the process of changing his gauze had to be an extremely slow and careful one, so as not to cause further damage. And this process, just changing his gauze every day, took a team of 10 people and over 3 hours to complete. His family never left his side. They played ambient forest sounds to keep his spirits up, and they folded 10,000 paper cranes. Now, according to legend, if you fold 1,000 of these origami cranes, these paper cranes, you will be granted a wish. And sometimes this is done to wish for prosperity on a newly married couple or a newborn baby, or sometimes to wish for recovery from illness or injury. Hisashi's family hoped that their 10,000 cranes would bring him luck and strength to endure and hopefully put him on the path to recovery. Unfortunately, and despite their unwavering support, Hisashi's suffering was relentless. At one point, he ripped off the mask or the gauze on his face and cried, "I'm not a guinea pig." And I can't imagine being in that situation and already in the hospital in excruciating pain, and then being poked and prodded with like experimental procedures in the hopes that maybe it might end your suffering. The doctors, the medical staff, and Hisashi's family had a heartbreaking dilemma in front of them, because while they're trying to help and they're trying to find a solution, were they prolonging his life? Were they giving him a chance at survival? Or were they just putting off the inevitability of his death and making him suffer more in the process? This was a question that they wrestled with every day, trying to balance the hope for his recovery with the reality, the very real reality of his suffering. As I mentioned before, Hisashi existed in this body that was causing him constant pain for 83 days. And on December 21st, 1999, at 11:21 p.m., Hisashi's body finally gave up, his heart stopped, and he passed away. The Tokaimura incident marked the beginning of significant changes, reflections by the nuclear industry and beyond. I'm sure it won't surprise you to hear that the incident led to serious legal consequences. The Science and Technology Agency revoked JCO's credentials, marking the first time a Japanese plant operator was punished by law. 6 JCO officials were prosecuted for professional negligence resulting in death. They received sentence ranging from 2 to 3 years in prison with probation. And I don't know about you, but for me, the punishment doesn't quite fit the crime. I guess it could have been worse, but I'm sure Hisashi's family doesn't see it that way. The accident also prompted a thorough reassessment of nuclear safety, just in general, but safety regulations in Japan. The flaws in the nuclear disaster prevention system were exposed, and that led to tighter safety protocols and improved emergency response measures. These changes aim to prevent a repeat of such a disaster and ensure a quicker, more effective response to nuclear emergencies in the future. There was also an impact on the local community. Residents near the facility were advised to stay indoors during the incident, and some were exposed to radiation levels that, while not immediately life-threatening, posed long-term health risks. Health monitoring and studies were initiated to assess the ongoing impact on the local population's health. And while over 50 of the tested plant workers were revealed to have radiation levels that exceeded safe, and many of the local population did as well, the only 2 fatalities of the incident were Ouchi and Shinohara. But the Tokaimura accident shook public confidence in nuclear safety, not just in Japan, but worldwide. It brought to light some of the inherent risks of nuclear power and the necessity for rigorous safety protocols. It influenced policy changes and spurred on technological advancements aimed at enhancing nuclear safety on a global scale. In 2014, the Japanese government introduced the Strategic Energy Plan. This was created to ensure safer nuclear production. Despite these efforts, the anxiety surrounding nuclear energy remains a constant struggle even today. Citizens have to balance the need for energy independence against the fear of potential disasters. I mean, I'm sure this isn't the first time you've thought about it, especially people who live or have lived near a nuclear power plant. Hisashi Ouchi's legacy is a reminder of the cost of cutting corners and neglecting safety. And while his story has left a mark on the nuclear industry and has served as a jumping off point to create better policies and higher standards of safety, while his story has driven changes that aim to prevent tragedies like his in the future, I'd be willing to bet that Hisashi's family and anyone who witnessed his suffering would see it as too little and too late. Anyway, thank you for joining us on this video about Hisashi Ouchi and the Tokaimura incident. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope maybe you learned something today. And as always, stay safe, stay curious, and hopefully we'll see you in the next one. Bye.